with the resurgence of hard power throughout the world. I like to tell our undergraduates that Harvard is a both-and kind of place, a place that attracts people who aren't satisfied by excelling in only one area. Joe made both-and seem quaint and limited, preferring an and ad infinitum approach. At the same time, he epitomized strategic thinking. As a public intellectual and as a public servant, he demonstrated the possibility and the power of focused effort at the intersection of academia and government. His contributions influenced events that shaped and no doubt saved the lives of countless people. He taught us, by the example he unfailingly set, the potential each of us has to make a difference. One might expect a man of such great accomplishment to consider the entries in his curriculum vitae to be his most notable achievements. In his course of life, however, Joe cherished most the kinds of success that persist not on paper, but in people. In early 2024, when asked what 3 things he would most like to be remembered for, he was quick to answer: as a family man, as an institutional builder, and as a creative individual. We celebrate today an outstanding member of the university community whose life was dynamic in every dimension. May we continue to strengthen the institutions he helped to build, and may his memory be a blessing for all of us.
Now I'd like to invite Bob Keohane to come forward and share some reflections.
Joseph Nye was my best friend. Best friend is not a phrase I use lightly, since I have many friends who are dear to me. But for me, Joe was special. We knew one another for 58 years, ever since an academic conference in Berkeley, California in 1967. We wrote 2 books together, including an early one that brought us to wider notice, and several articles. We attended many academic conferences together, often as the leaders of groups we had convened. Joe's was always the voice of calm reason, clear and precise, not pulling any punches, but not at all given to hyperbole or exaggeration. Others at this memorial service knew Joe more as a policymaker and commentator on American foreign policy, a leading intellectual spokesperson for a responsible, engaged liberal internationalism that is sorely missed today. Sometimes I join my voice with his in attempts to articulate this view, but Joe was the leader in these efforts to make a difference in the public debate. His distinctive contributions with me were academic and intellectual, seeking to articulate the political implications of enhanced economic interdependence. How economic interdependence, especially asymmetrical interdependence, affected power, and therefore the ability of the United States, as well as other countries, to influence the course of world politics. When I think about Joe, I often envisage him in a physical setting. Sometimes that setting is the 18th century house in Lexington, where Joe and I often worked in the 1970s when I came from California. Occasionally, he came west, but I had more meetings in Cambridge than he had in Stanford, so our working sessions during the winter were more often in his house in Lexington. But especially after Nan and I moved east in 1981, the landscape was often New Hampshire, where he and Molly owned an old and renovated farmhouse. In the summer and fall, their house was a perfect jumping-off place for mountain climbing. In the winter, it was a site for cross-country skiing, walks along the deserted road in perfectly dark nights, and talking in front of their blazing fire. Nan and I visited them for years between 1981 and 2018, 37 years of stopping at the state liquor store on Route 93, then winding through the increasingly mountainous and beautiful countryside to their farm in North Sandwich. When we began to winter in California, we were blessed by the fact that Joe and Molly also came to Palo Alto when the East Coast weather was bad. Since they were typically there for a month or more, we kept up our personal friendship, which intensified after they moved into our retirement community, Brookhaven, in Lexington in 2021. So the other landscapes that I associate with Joe are those of Northern California and Eastern Massachusetts. Joe loved the mountains. He was a great hiker. He was also an expert woodsman, able to show his guests where a hawk had caught a ground squirrel in the snow, or how beavers had built a dam with trees that they felled with their teeth. Once, when Joe and I and Nan were hiking with a mountain summit as a destination, a persistent, cold, dreary rain began to fall. It was miserable. About 2/3 of the way up, I quite sensibly proposed that we turn back. Nan made an unhelpful comment, and Joe just turned his back on me and continued to trudge on, saying nothing. In view of such determination, there was nothing I could do but follow them. Joe Nye, curious intellectual, creative theorist of world politics, perceptive observer, dedicated and focused analyst of policy, woodsman, true friend. We celebrate his life.
Thank you so much. Now I invite you to rise in body and or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, All Creatures of the Earth and Sky. You will find the words printed in your order of service. Please be seated as David Sanger comes forward to share his reflections.
Good morning. I'm David Sanger. I cover the White House for the New York Times, but a better description of my role in life, one that I suspect fits most of us here in Memorial Church this morning, is that I've been lucky enough to be a lifelong student of Joe Nye. That apprenticeship began in a classroom just steps from here, but it continued in sushi joints in Tokyo when Joe was visiting as a government official, at the Kennedy School, and on the lakes of the Adirondacks and the rivers of Alaska. And it was on the water that Joe's ever-present smile got even bigger, as you can see from that wonderful photograph on the back of your program today. And it's there that he taught some of his most lasting lessons. Part of the Joe Nye continuing education program on how to live and enjoy life. It turns out you could learn a lot about Joe and a good deal about soft power and a bit about smart power waiting alongside him. Now, this was usually a pretty humbling experience. Joe would graciously wave the novices into the water first and explain where to cast and provide some much-needed tips. And the trout were thoroughly unimpressed. And then as we moved upriver, Joe would quietly slip in right behind. And with a graceful and effortless cast, he'd drop the fly behind just the right rock or the quiet edge of an eddy. He was reading the river with dead accuracy. "It's the power of attraction," he would say with that disarming smile as the prey leapt onto his line. Fish, he explained, were lazy and liked to hide away out of the current with their mouths open, looking for a good morsel without expending much energy. "If you understand fish," Joe would say, "you understand politicians." Joe cast a fly line the same way he conducted a seminar, with style and with precision, adjusting to an ever-changing environment. He made the impossibly difficult look incredibly easy because of years of study and practice. It was understandable that this ultimate symbol of the East Coast establishment was comfortable in Alaska, because, of course, he had spent his summers working there in a mining camp and insisted that he enjoyed it. In fact, for anyone who knew Joe as a product of Princeton and Oxford and Harvard, it was refreshing to discover that he grew up in a rural corner of New Jersey, where, as he wrote later, it was more important to be athletic than to be rich. It wasn't until he hit the Morristown School that he discovered he could be first in his class. And, of course, it was there that his younger sister introduced him to Molly Harding. She instantly became, he wrote in his memoir, the most important person in my life. And anyone who met Molly later, that mix of New England kindness and brilliance and steel, understood why. They moved to Africa together, and later to the house on the edge of Lexington Green. Determined to make a difference, they did repeated stints in Washington. In government or out, Joe was constantly moving around the world, gathering former students to figure out what was really going on. In Tokyo, a place of fascination for Joe for decades, I discovered quickly that he had a deeper network than the American Embassy's political section and CIA station combined. And back in Cambridge, he nurtured friendships that lasted decades, few deeper than the one with our friend Graham Allison. These two former deans became the heart and soul of the Kennedy School for decades. They always had a book underway. They always had a fishing trip being planned, often with Joe and Molly's 3 sons, and a few of us lucky enough to be invited along for the hilarity, and for Joe's repeated encounters with grizzlies. To you guys, I'm a Harvard professor, he would frequently say. To the bears, I'm protein. For a chunk of protein, Joe's range was really remarkable. He explored whether the American century was over, and he asked, do morals matter in the foreign policy of American presidents? A volume, he told me earlier this year, could use an update. He explained why we had too many hawks and doves and not enough owls. He produced an autobiography aptly named A Life in the American Century. And here's a little-known fact. When he felt constrained by academic prose, he wrote a novel about a Princeton professor who gets involved in a presidential campaign, becomes Undersecretary of State, only to find his principles at odds with the ethics of the era. He runs into an old college flame who was up to no good at the Pentagon. Yes, believe it or not, it includes a racy scene that shocked Ben, Dan, and John. And trust me, from many fishing trips, I can tell you they do not have delicate sensibilities. So there you go, Joe. I just sold you a few more copies. The novel missed the Nobel Prize for Literature, but just about everything else hit the mark. After Joe gave up the deanship of the Kennedy School, there was a day-long celebration of his works. Students, academics, senators, journalists, they all poured into Cambridge to debate the Nye concepts, especially soft power, which had seeped into the public discourse. They roasted him all evening at dinner. But the truth was that Joe taught us the difference between bravado and true power. And he patiently explained why counting naval tonnage and nukes might in the end prove a less important measure of power than our generosity or the strength of our democracy. He loved to quote Stalin's supposed question to Churchill at the Tehran conference in 1943. How many divisions does the Pope have? Stalin asked. By the early 1990s, Joe pointed out, the Soviet Empire was gone. The Vatican was still around. But Joe was also a realist. With time, he wrote a few years ago, I have come to realize that concepts such as soft power are like children. As an academic or public intellectual, you can love and discipline them when they are young, but as they grow, they wander off and make new company, both good and bad. There's not much you can do about it, even if you were present at the creation. Still, he had this superhuman quality of never really seeming annoyed or short-tempered. Well, that's not entirely true. A few years back, an otter made his way into Joe's ice pond up at that spectacular farm that you heard about that he and Molly so loved in New Hampshire. In a day or two, every trout had been consumed. No sooner did Joe get home than he reached for his hunting rifle, looking for the perpetrator. Soon, a shot rang out. Really, Joe, we asked him? Wouldn't it have been more humane to persuade the otter that it wasn't in his long-term self-interest to eat your prized trout? I never said that soft power works for everything, David, he insisted. And indeed, he didn't. He showed that every day when he ran the National Intelligence Council, at one point bringing Bill Clinton news he really didn't want to hear about how close the North Koreans were to a nuclear weapon. And he was always testing out his own orthodoxies. In his mid-70s, out of pure curiosity, Joe immersed himself in the question of how cyber power might change the way states undercut each other. But rather than just blindly apply the lessons from the nuclear age to a new technology, he became the first to explain why those lessons didn't make sense in a world of cyber weapons. And not satisfied to stop there, in his mid-80s, he plunged into the national security implications of artificial intelligence. Joe, of course, worried that in a world of hardening views and political stridency, he needed to try to create safe spaces where, against the odds, political adversaries might actually listen to each other. Each summer, as he opened the deliberations of the Aspen Strategy Group, Joe's creation along with Brent Scowcroft and Bill Perry, he reminded everyone at the opening session of the importance of giving people the space to listen and the room to change their position. He was determined to restore civility to public debate. Clearly, this worked better in Aspen than it did in Washington. And in the last months of his life, Joe watched with some despair as the sources of true American power that he worked so hard to nurture over the years came under such intense attack. "I'm afraid President Trump doesn't understand soft power," Joe said a few days before his death in an interview with admirable understatement. "Think back on the Cold War," he said. "The Berlin Wall didn't go down under a barrage of artillery. It went down under hammers and bulldozers wielded by people whose minds had been changed by the Voice of America and BBC." President Trump, he wrote, is so obsessed with the problem of free riders that he forgets that it's been in America's interest to drive the bus. We don't know if that bus has completed its last route, but we do know that Joe trained generations of bus drivers. He's left us with a model for how to bring joy and endless curiosity to his work well into your 80s. He reminded us, in his quiet way, that he trained us to do more than compose models of how the world works. He taught us to improve lives, reveal uncomfortable truths, to extend and improve on the American experiment that started in his and Molly's front yard 250 years ago. In my mind's eye, Joe, even today, is standing in waist-deep water, throwing a perfectly aimed cast into the river of life. His line goes tight as the fish takes off with a fly, his patter of jokes and analogies never pausing while he reels in his catch. He is showing us all how it should be done. Thank you.
Thank you, and now I invite Graham Allison to come and share a poem by Robert Service.
So, good morning. As we make our way up the path from grief at the loss of Joe Nye to gratitude for the wonder of having had him in our lives, let me offer or suggest a crutch that I've found useful. So think of the alphabet, A to Z, pick a letter, and then think of your experiences with Joe that enriched your life. I do this almost every day, so you can pick any letter, and it's fun. If you start with A, the first thing that would come to many of our minds is Alaska, an amazing state to which I probably would never have gone had Joe not proposed that we stop over there en route to Japan, and what became a ritual every year for the next 25 years. Joe was a man of many parts, as we've heard today, a life with many dimensions. The love of his life was Molly, his wife of almost 7 decades. The pride of his life was his 3 remarkable sons and their wives and their grandchildren, who named him Joe Fish. The joy of his life, though, was the great outdoors, the wild outdoors, a part of Joe that many people never really saw, and which this poem that I was asked to read speaks to. He loved hiking through uncharted territory, even once taking us into a bog that had quicksand. He'd rafting unknown rivers, including one that had an unexpected waterfall that flipped our raft and he almost drowned. Setting up tents wherever he chose along the river. Catching, killing, gutting, cooking, and then eating a wild king salmon, or a silver salmon, or a sockeye, or God forbid, even a chum or a pink. He loved getting loose of the conventions of civilization, not just to think unthinkables, but to talk about untalkables or unspeakables, including life and death. So on these fishing trips, especially in Alaska, around the campfire between shots of alcohol, he enjoyed reciting poems. And I'm happy to recite or to read one of his favorites, Robert Service's Call of the Wild. Have you glazed on naked grandeur where there's nothing else to glaze on, set pieces and drop curtain scenes galore? Big mountains heave to heaven with blinding sunsets blazing, black canyons where the rapids rip and roar. Have you swept the Vision Valley and the green stream streaking through it? Searched the vastness for something you've lost. Have you strung your soul to silence? Then for God's sake, go and do it. Hear the challenge. Learn the lesson. Pay the cost. Have you wandered in the wild, the sagebrush desolation, the bunchgrass leaves where the cattle graze? Have you whistled bits of ragtime at the end of all creation and learned to know the desert's little ways? Have you camped upon the foothills? Have you galloped over the ranges? Have you roamed the arid sunlands through and through? Have you chummed up with the mesa? Do you know the moods and changes? Then listen to the wild. It's calling you. Have you known the great white silence, not snow gem twig a quiver, eternal truths, the shame our soothing lies? Have you broken trail on snowshoes, mushed your huskies up the river, dared the unknown, led the way, and clutched the prize? Have you marked the map's void spaces, mingled with Mongol races, felt the savage strength of brute in every thew? And though grim as hell the worst is, can you round it off with curses? Then hearken to the wild. It's wanting you. Have you suffered, starved, and triumphed, groveled down and yet grasped at glory, growing bigger in the bigness of the whole? Done things just for the doing, left babblers to tell the story, seeing through the nice veneer the naked soul? Have you seen God in his splendor, heard the text that nature renders you'll never hear in the family pew? The simple things, the true things, the silent men who do things. Then listen to the wild, it's calling you. They've cradled you in custom. They've primed you with their preaching. They've soaked you in convention through and through. They put you in a showcase. You're a credit to their teaching. But can't you hear the wild? It's calling you. Let us probe the silent places. Let us seek what luck betides us. Let us journey to a lonely land I know. There's a whisper on the night call. There's a star agleam to guide us. And the wild is calling, calling. Let us go. We're going to miss Joe forever.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite John, Ben, and Dan to come forward to share their family reflections.
I don't know why they have a riser here for me. I told them I didn't need it, but I'll play ball. I've also understood that I have a hard out after 4 minutes. So what I'm about to share with you is not on the clock. Looking out these windows, it's an absolutely perfect day. Our parents would be thrilled. And before I tackle my 4-minute memorial, I'd like to acknowledge and appreciate, on behalf of my brothers and our extended family, all of you for coming here today, President Garber for your remarks, our esteemed guests and speakers, the Belfer Center and the Kennedy School in its entirety. Thanks to my sisters-in-law, Jenny Pyle and Megan, and my lovely wife, whose tireless planning and attention to detail since the start of the year made both celebrations celebratory, and who cared for our parents as though they were their own. Recognition also goes to Aaron Davis and Christiana Sullivan, who toil effortlessly behind the scenes and played a huge role in making today come to fruition. They may have actually made the weather so perfect. Those women are incredibly talented. And finally, I'd like to thank Ann Mason for making the trip from Lexington to join us here today. She sent our mother off in spectacular fashion and is doing a wonderful job and helped us through our grief and losses in 2025. And she is a fellow Clintonian, so props to Clinton. Now, one other thought that must be said, and I have to take this opportunity to let you all know that I was unequivocally their favorite son. That's one of the benefits of going first. And that lasted only a year, unfortunately. The man-to-man defense or offense, depending on your perspective, that Mom and Dad enjoyed with Ben and me was quickly diluted the following year when Dan came along. And from that point on, our parents made it abundantly clear that they adored their Irish triplets each, 33 1/3%, and not a percentage more. Everything was equal. And after that, I never recovered. So, my 4 minutes begin now. In a word, déjà vu. I could leave it at that and return to my seat because most of you know we recently stood before a crowded room remembering our mother, who characteristically died surrounded by her entire family. It was lovely, but not all that surprising. Conversely, Dad died unexpectedly, presumably of a broken heart, but only a few of us made it to his bedside. Permit me to illustrate how his departure was as characteristically somber and jarring as Mom's was celebratory and cathartic. As we've already heard, others here today have praised his professional accomplishments. So my brothers and I will share some insight and shed the light on the person that we call Dad. The person many of you regard as the father of modern international diplomacy, and the person that our grandchildren affectionately referred to as Joe Fish. Sobriquets aside, he was not a complicated man. He was disciplined, lived life to the fullest, did it on his terms, accomplished a great deal, and practiced Yankee thrift. He was an excellent role model who didn't hide behind a hard shell with a soft interior, much like a cannoli. Dad was more like a ripe piece of organic fruit, plucked from his orchard, the mature, colorful skin enclosing a juicy, complex interior guarding the pit, the embodiment of one of his favorite songs. Summarizing the lyrics, he recognized that the strongest oak must fall, the sweetest things in life were only loaned, not to take it too seriously, so one must live and laugh at it all, because life is just a bowl of cherries. His interests led him to inquire about families, hobbies, studies, and countries of origin. The numerous international remembrances sent to and compiled by the Belfer Center following his untimely death highlighted his ability to make everyone feel seen, special, important. The comments proved what I had only previously surmised. His relationships with the public were meaningful, but differed than the relationships he had with the family. And though they were not always obvious, we were always his priority, bedrock knowledge upon which I relied. Dad spent his youth hunting, fishing, and trapping on his family's farm in, I know, it's hard to believe, rural New Jersey. These solitary activities during his formative years foreshadowed the independence that expressed itself later as an angler, gardener, and author. He often took us fishing, frequently with many of the people in the room here today. And being a March baby, I was 3 months old the first time I joined my parents on the Kennebec and Penobscot rivers. Somehow he tore himself away from Harvard, his new employer, and in June of 1964, Mom and I battled black flies in the Army surplus pup tent while he battled trout and landlocked salmon in rural Maine. In our youth, we reluctantly weeded the garden, begrudgingly picked the ripe vegetables, and clandestinely rolled our eyes as he marveled at the wonders of nature's bounty. One of his greatest accomplishments, in fact, wasn't an op-ed, an honorary degree, or a distinguished service award, but the purple, not blue, purple ribbon he won for Best in Show Red Cabbage at the Sandwich Fair. And finally, as an author, academic, and professor, he always reminded me that my school essays had to say what I was going to say it, and say that I had said it. I believe I've accomplished the first two mantras, so let me end with, I miss you, and I love you, Dad. There. Now I've said it. Okay, can you hear me? John, that was beautiful. You will not hear such beauty from me. I do want to say thank you as well to President Garber, Dean Weinstein, and to everybody, faculty, friends, and family who are here. Thank you. I want to particularly thank my brother John for redefining what 4 minutes means. And leaving me with a tearjerker ending to pick up. This is killing me. Okay, so look, this morning is a day of celebration, and we're here to celebrate Dad and recognize how grateful we are for the powerful role he played in all our lives. Professionally, you may have known him as Dean, Chairman, Director, Assistant Secretary, or simply Professor Nye. He advised U.S. presidents and world leaders. He served in the U.S. government back when it was a place of principle, and ran the Kennedy School of Government. And he was part of the Harvard faculty for 65 years, including a finishing stint as a university-wide distinguished professor. During this time, Dad helped shape our understandings of modern power and international relations. He was a serious person, but he did not take life too seriously. At home, he was known, as you've heard now, he was known as Joe Fish. He was a farmer, a fly fisherman, and a father. And unlike the three of us before you, those were the only 3 F's he ever earned. Let's talk about farming. Dad was raised on a farm in Morristown. The farm fueled his natural curiosity, sense of mischievousness, and adventure, and even informed those early perspectives on power. One day, when he successfully stranded his youngest sister, Ellie, on the family's pig shed roof, he quickly learned the consequences of parental power. Okay? Another time, after whacking all parishioners arriving with palms on the head on a Palm Sunday, he learned the consequences of religious power. But finally, when he accidentally tied his dog Buster's metal leash to the electrified garden fence, he learned, and Buster learned, shocking power, as the dog yipped and flipped every 15 seconds while they were weeding. Okay? Yes, having encountered so many forms of hard power at such a young age, he knew something was missing. And so he launched his nearly 9-decade search for softer powers. Now, Dad's second love was fly fishing. It began when his father took him to the Kennebec River in Maine. Together, they fished and sang "Life is Just a Bowl of Cherries," whose lyrics, as John just described, emphasized, don't take life's worries too seriously. Grandpa taught Dad, who in turn taught us, that fishing offered many great adventures in nature and a powerful opportunity to reprioritize your life. I have to wonder, however, if Dad could have foreseen any consequences of encouraging his 3 highly energetic, competitive, and adventuresome boys to take more risk. Family was Dad's greatest passion. It began when he met our mom through his youngest sister, Ellie. They were married 63 years and became a power couple. Dad was the hardworking, well-recognized educator, while Mom was the creative artist and social connector who empowered him. They were the role models, best friends, and produced 3 loving sons. For those of you who don't know us, we were quiet, scholarly, creative, and almost angelic. For those of you who do know us, please remember it's a memorial service and we're trying to keep those comments down. Okay? Growing up in Lexington, we were known as the Xerox Brothers, owing to our closeness in age, 28 months start to finish, and common interests. We enjoyed crosstown bumper riding, aiming snowballs at cars, and outrunning the Lexington police, which actually was surprisingly easy. Our parents took these antics in stride, but they did wince a little bit when we threw their Aspen Strategy Group attendees, John Deutsch, Ash Carter, Graham Allison, Dick Cheney, with John Deutsch's sons, into the cold Colorado River. On other occasions, like when we helped a minivan discard its bumper by tying it to a tree, Dad did invoke his parenting powers and made sure that there was corrective measures. But only once can I recall Dad questioning his adventuresome mindset. When we nearly floated into, get this, 8 grizzly bears on a small river in Alaska. To be clear, this incident included an angry sow's heart-stopping false charge. After the danger had passed, we all agreed to be a lot more careful around grizzly bears. That is what I think probably inspired his term smart power. With the arrival of their first grandchild, Dad and Mom purchased a 19th century farm in Sandwich. They called it Moose Meadow Farm, and it became their happy place to relax with family and friends. Appropriately, the farm housed the confluence of 2 beautiful New Hampshire trout streams, and over the years, with additional land purchases, Moose Meadow Farm became nearly 1,000 acres, which they donated to conservation. It's a practice we will continue. Together on this farm, Dad and Mom learned to make maple syrup for Sunday morning buttermilk pancakes. Dad planted vegetables while Mom preferred her flower gardens. Both submitted and won countless blue ribbons. It was a competition. During COVID, Dad loaded multiple grandchildren into a rowboat on the back of his pickup truck. All sat in open air, seatbeltless, while he drove along the country roads to his favorite fishing spots. The kids loved these crazy adventures and appreciated Joe Fish's horsepower. Dad loved his role as a father, and eventually father-in-law and grandfather. He was happy to play in the sandbox, as host a cookout with burned hot dogs, join a tea party, swim in the ice pond, or manage the intricacies of a Yankee swap. Regardless of the ages involved, Dad patiently explained current events, connecting with anyone curious enough to ask. I do wonder if prepping for summits may have helped him with summers. As I reflect now, I am so thankful for a dad who made time with us to fish, who encouraged our adventures, but also had the patience to remind us that life is just a bowl of cherries. When searching for his grandparenting nickname, because he absolutely refused to be called Grandpa, he could have been Joe Professor, Joe Gardner, Joe Farmer, but actually his name could only be Joe Fish because it encompassed his love of family and adventure, and those were truly his superpowers. Thanks.
I'm sure, let me say to understand Joe Nye, it's important to think of the familiar saying, behind every great man is a third son. When our mom died, just 5 months before our dad, Joe described her as the perfect matriarch that she was. Not surprisingly, perfect patriarch would be the appropriate moniker for our dad. They were quite a pair, high integrity, positive, and caring people who made life better for their communities and all of those who knew them. The outpouring of love, admiration, sadness, and wonderful stories following our parents' deaths was a great comfort to our family. And to all of you who reached out, thank you. The Kennedy School's tribute to Joe and the media coverage the world over was extraordinary. Radio shows and podcasts covered his life's work, and the obituaries were beautiful. Clearly, he lived a life that mattered. I can assure you that it mattered at home as well. Joe lived his life with purpose, values, and discipline that guided him to invest equally in his profession, family, health, relationship with nature. He lived his life with gratitude. He felt indebted to family, mentors, friends, students, and the institutions that contributed so much to his success. He knew our mom was the most important person in his life. He appreciated her endless sacrifices and knew he could never have a complete life without the support that she gave him. She was the partner who traveled the world, attended the events, created a home, hosted family, and served meals at 9 p.m. so he could finish working in the garden or cast that fly until he could no longer see it on the dark water. She was there for him, but also kept him humble with expressions like, "When Joe goes fishing, it's just a jerk at one end of the line waiting for a jerk at the other." Yeah, our dad's self-discipline drove us crazy at times. But when it was our turn, he was always there for us. The man who was often so serious and rational was also funny and playful. His favorite form of humor was teasing, and nobody beat a joke to death like Joe. He arrived at dinner with thought-provoking questions to generate debate and brought clippings from the New York Times or The Economist to share his latest insights. That's the kind of father he was, always learning and always teaching. Our dad made it clear that he was proud of us even when that couldn't possibly have been true. He spent time with us even when we were going through insufferable stages of life. He built us a playroom in the basement, a tree fort in the backyard, and each winter in the 1970s, he built us a skating rink that froze when temperatures dropped. By the way, I'm sure all of that was to get us out of the house. Dad played football and pond hockey with us, but most enjoyed sharing his passions, fishing and hunting in the Adirondacks, skiing in New Hampshire, squash at Hamilton College, and hiking in Aspen. He didn't give us money, he made us earn it. The going rate was 50 cents an hour because he provided the room and board. The tasks were most often weeding the garden, shining his shoes, mowing the lawn, raking leaves, and shoveling the driveway. If we bugged him on a 5-hour drive back to Lexington from an adventure, he'd create a challenge to keep us quiet. "Boys," he'd say, "I'll give you each $1 if you don't say another word until we're back to Lexington." By the way that would work out is Ben would actually do it. I would figure out a way to get John to talk, and then I would forget about the game and blow it for myself. This history helps you understand more about who he was as a father and why we so adored him. And now in closing, I'll tell you about one of his proudest accomplishments and how our family will say our final goodbye. In 1991, our parents bought that farm in New Hampshire. Over decades, they added adjacent properties to amass nearly 1,000 wooded acres. Years ago, they put some of that land in conservation, and then just last year, they added almost the entire property to the easement. This land, which is full of life and includes the watersheds of the Whiteface River and the Cold River, is spectacular. So the next time you look at a map of New Hampshire, you can put your finger just below the White Mountains National Forest and know that nearly 1 square mile of the state of New Hampshire will remain forever wild because of Joe and Molly Nye. Tomorrow, our family will climb the hill at the farm to the highest point on that square mile. Up at the top, we will bury our dad's and mom's ashes together, side by side. We'll shed tears, say our final farewells, and read this poem by Robert Frost. Nothing gold can stay. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down today. Nothing gold can stay.
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite the grandchildren to come forward and share their reflections.
Hello. I'm Coleman. Grandchild 6, speaker 1. These are my cousins. Hannah, Molly, Maggie, Tupper, Brooke, Avery, Ellie, Sage. I'm gonna try not to rush through this. It's always amazed me how most people knew Joe Fish, or Joseph S. Nye, as this worldly academic and intensely analytical man. That was not my original perception of him. For the first, call it 10 years of my life, I thought he was a farmer from New Hampshire who just happened to be really good at swatting my dad's dinner table arguments. I wasn't necessarily wrong, but there was so much more to him. You'd think the dinner table seminaries on succession patterns and isolationism would have clued us into this other life he lived. But we weren't all so scholarly, especially at the time. I love the grandfather that I knew, and I'm grateful for everybody who's spoken today for teaching me a little bit more about him. Now, hopefully, we can teach you something about him too.
I think one reason it took us so long to fully grasp just how remarkable Joe Fish was is because he never bragged. This was a man who wore Carhartt jackets and 45-year-old denim long before it was cool, and who cared deeply about us, our education, and what fascinated us. He always listened and asked questions with genuine interest, met each of us where we were, and encouraged us to think for ourselves. Even when dinner conversations went way over our heads, he made everyone feel included. I never saw one of his legendary Harvard lectures, but sitting at his table felt like having a front row seat. We were lucky to be his students, and it was incredible how he seemed to have a working knowledge of just about everything.
Or at least almost everything. Though he had an amazingly sharp mind, he never seemed to be able to wrap it around the realm of technology. As a result, he kindly and consistently employed the 9 of us as tech support. Though the only support I could offer was powering the device off and then back on, he would always make me feel like I was masterful with the computer when I returned a slightly more functional iPhone to him. One year, Joe Fish decided he would download Instagram. He outsourced his captioning to us, which is why if you follow Joe Fish Nye on Instagram, his captions say things like squad and lit. Although you might also come across old man trimming 12-foot tree we planted when he was young, which he came up with on his own.
Speaking of trees, I loved how much care he put into his Christmas trees to always pick the most Charlie Brown looking one. But I guess that was what brought him joy. In that field of firs was also all 9 of us, perfectly preserved steel cutouts of who we were 18 years ago. I'll never forget what felt like the coldest day of 2007 when our dads laid us down on plywood to cut out shapes based on how we saw ourselves. I was a ballerina, Cole was a knight. Those silhouettes have been through rain, shine, sleet, snow, witnessing and holding memories made at Moose Meadow Farm. I like to think that on days when Joe might have felt stressed or overwhelmed, doing the politics and stuff, he could look out and have a quiet conversation with 5-year-old me or 3-year-old Brookie and remind himself of that wisdom he always passed to us, to just trust ourselves and be who we wanted.
Joe Fish listened to our interests and enthusiastically supported our pursuits. We were always encouraged to explore our curiosities, as Joe Fish was a firm believer that if you did what you loved, the money would follow. He would listen attentively and rarely, if ever, said that you should choose one path or the other. He left that up to us. The only paths that he made for us were the ones that he physically created on his property in the New Hampshire woods. Hand-painted signs with our names marking these paths were beautiful and original, much like the grandchildren's lives that unfolded to be.
Joe Fish also kept close tabs on the ever-evolving interspecies politics between the bugs and his award-winning vegetables, for which he pulled many a blue ribbon at the sandwich fair. A central piece to who Joe Fish was at home was his relationship to nature. His careful observation of the environment around him enabled him to anticipate and thwart the strategies of native pests seeking to destroy his crops before they made it to the dinner table. When he was inside, he kept a fire burning in the living room and read Robert Frost poetry, the images of which reflected his same love for the New England woods. Through his numerous outdoor hobbies, which also included early morning hunting, late fall swims in the ice pond, and carving Grimali's initials into old tree stumps with a chainsaw, he showed us how to cultivate our own place in the give-and-take politics of the natural world and encouraged us to develop our own unique relationships with the outdoors.
The outdoors showed his adventurous spirit, but his character was brightest in the everyday. He lived with a humility that defined him. He only ever bought what he needed, and definitely took that a bit too far. Until we went through his closet, I really believed he owned 3 pairs of pants, the green flannel ones that he brought out annually for Christmas, slacks for the lecture hall, and his threadbare dungarees, which had clearly survived 40 seasons of gardening, which, unlike our ripped jeans that, yes, Joe Fish, we bought like that, his holy jeans were organic. At their home in New Hampshire, we'd dare each other to eat the pantry mint jelly that predated our own lives. And God forbid you asked Grimali for a Tylenol. It was likely from '91. Still, when something gets moldy, our family joke is, just scrape the top off. It's great underneath. We tease them for this, but the truth is, I really admired his ability to stay grounded, with no ego, just his presence, curiosity, and a lot of love.
If you saw Joe Fish's car, you might further question his taste. The car he drove was nicknamed the Shugu Mobile, an outdated stick-shift pickup truck held together with tape and glue. The state of the car was the result of a DIY repair job after high snow and a run-in with his own barn left part of the roof with a hole. Joe Fish thrilled us with his generosity when we were invited to go with him to the town dump, a riveting adventure in which he sorted the trash and recycling while we got to pick out discarded toys in the swap shack. Our parents were less enthused by the stained stuffed animals that we returned with, discreetly reeking of beer and compost. But for us, it was better than Christmas. The dump itself was nothing more than 2 smelly buildings, but Joe Fish made it feel like an adventure and a treat.
Finally, the most important thing about Joe Fish was Grimali. After 63 years of marriage, they had plenty of shared jokes. She would make fun of him, and he convinced each of the grandchildren that it was Grimali, not the lawnmower, that bit off his finger and pulled out his hair. Ultimately, though, it was impossible not to see how much they loved each other. After a day of mowing the fields or enjoying the river, Joe Fish would happily bestow a handful of weeds or fresh fish to Grimali. Despite having one of the most beautiful flower gardens in New Hampshire, Grimali always worked his weeds into her centerpieces and learned how to cook his catch. Then, around the dinner table with his children, grandchildren, and any guests, he would spend the time bragging about how incredible she was and how he had spent the whole day thinking about her. Together, they were the perfect role models for what a marriage should be, always appreciating and celebrating the effort that the other put in, even if the outcome wasn't perfect.
Joe Fish was one of the most naturally curious, patient, and loving people we've ever known, and maybe will ever know. From the way he thought about the world and everyone in it, to the way he loved our grandmother, he was an incredible role model for how to live, learn, and love. The fortunate thing is, a little piece of him rubbed off on all of us, and all of you. For having known him, loved him, and learned from him, we are undoubtedly a lucky bunch.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah, grandchild number 2. This is my cousin Mike. We're going to sing one of Joe Fish's favorite songs.
Roses
Flows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air and feather canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in my way. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's cloud illusions I recall. I really don't know clouds at all. Moons and Junes and Ferris wheels, the dizzy dancing way you feel as every fairy tale comes real. I've looked at love that way, but now it's just another show. You leave 'em laughing when you go, and if you care, don't let them know. Don't give yourself away. I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take, and still somehow it's love's illusions I recall. I really don't know love at all. Tears and fears and feeling proud to say I love you right out loud. Dreams and schemes and circus crowds, I've looked at life that way. But now old friends are acting strange. They shake their heads, they say I've changed. Well, something's lost, but something's gained in living every day. I've looked at life from both sides now, from win and lose, and still somehow it's life's illusions I recall. I really don't know life at all. I've looked at life from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's life's illusions I recall. I really don't know life at all.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Michael. That was one of my mother's favorite songs, too, so I just feel even more connected to all of you through this. And that sense of not knowing, I think, is just that sense of curiosity that inspires great scholars like Joe Nye. So thank you. The last time that I saw Joe was on Easter. I greeted him on the front steps with a warm hug and a handshake and a "How are you doing, Joe?" after Molly died. And he looked at me and he said, "It's all gratitude. It's all gratitude." And so as we bring our service to a close, I ask you to join with me in a prayer of gratitude. O infinite Spirit of life and love, we have been granted such a gift in the life of Joseph Nye. We are grateful beyond measure for him, for the lessons he taught us all, and for the inspiration he planted in all of our hearts. Help us to live with the open-hearted intelligence and love which anchored his life. Help us to find his spark of resilience and humor and joy, that we might discover gratitude in the midst of trouble and beauty in the midst of adversity. And help us to live with a strong sense of our own influence, that we might help to build an ethical world dedicated to the greater good. Spirit of mystery, Spirit of life, grant to Joe your peace, which passes understanding. Guide him gently into that good night, surrounding him with the eternal love which began before we were formed on this earth and which carries us into the eternal. We give thanks for the light of love that persists through death and lives in human hearts. We give thanks for this gathering of friends and colleagues and family as we celebrate the past, walk together in the present, and rely on each other in the days to come. May the Spirit of love surround us as we travel on. Amen. Please rise as you are able as we conclude this service of remembrance and affirmation for the life of Joseph Nye. Humbly we stand in the face of death. Confidently we stand with life. Our strength is the strength of many. Indeed, it is the strength of humanity throughout all time, because we share one fate and one great compassion. May understanding go with us, and peace too, that we may live together in charity, compassion, peace, and joy. And joy. In this spirit, let us individually and together go forth to live and to love and to learn to fish the river. Please remain standing and join in singing a family favorite hymn, Simple Gifts. We sang this for Molly's memorial a few months ago. And today we come full circle and sing it for Joe, for the family, and for ourselves. 'Tis the gift to be simple. Posted.